Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Fleur Snedden's book, King of the Castle, a biography of William Larnach. This is the third biography of Larnach that I've read in the past couple of months as part of research for an article that I'm writing. And this is, I would say, in some ways the best of them. It's certainly the most engaging read of the three. It's also a very interesting biography as such, in part because of Snedden's historiographic techniques. Because that's ultimately what I'm interested in with reading about William Larnach, is the historiography surrounding his death, how people narrate the rationale for his suicide. I'll also mention this parenthetically. I'm running laundry, so if you're hearing a sort of rumbling sound in the background over the background music, that's what that is. I apologize if the mic is picking that up. It probably isn't, but whatever. So, one of the things that makes Snedden unique as a biographer of Larnach compared to A.H. Reid and Hardwicke Knight, which are the other two biographies, or the authors of the other two biographies that I've read, is that Snedden is the great-great-granddaughter of William Larnach. So she is a descendant of the subject of the book. That guy right there. And so that means two things, historiographically. One is that Snedden's grandmother, Gretchen Gies Larnach, Snedden's grandmother, directly knew William Larnach. She was there while in the castle while he was alive for the last little bit of his life. And so Snedden has this connection with direct memories of William Larnach, which Reid might have in 1950 when his book comes out. There'd be more people alive who directly knew Larnach that he could have interviewed. By the 1980s, by the time that Knight writes his biography, it's less likely. But Snedden, because she knew her grandmother, actually had a direct personal connection. The other reason that personal connection is important is because Snedden, as she says in the opening of the prologue, for many years boxes of papers and letters belonging to William Larnach had laid stacked in a cupboard, and I had made a half-hearted promise to myself that one day I would sort them into some kind of order. Which means that for this biography, Snedden was able to draw on personal letters, personal papers, business documents, things that Larnach himself had collected, things that his family members had collected, and had been passed down through the family. Those were resources that Reid and Knight did not have access to. And it really shows in the quality of the evidence presented in some portions of this book that she just had greater access to direct material evidence about Larnach's life and times. There's extensive quotation of letters or portions of letters of business documents, personal papers, things like this, to show that the basic narrative that Snedden constructs of Larnach's life is rooted in the documentary evidence. So that's really, really good historiographically, right? Like, the others make reference to documents, newspaper reports, things like that, and Snedden, of course, does as well, but she also has those primary source documents that other biographers did not have. The potential downside of Snedden's familial connection to William Larnach is that her grandmother's view of Larnach as a sort of bitter, vindictive, domineering man, which seems to have been most true in the latter portion of his life, has somewhat colored Snedden's understanding of his life. Though, as she herself says, once she started digging into these documentary materials and these personal letters and things like this, she was surprised to find someone who was much more generous, much more caring, much more concerned about his family's well-being, etc., than the picture that her grandmother had painted. So I give her full marks for that. But in terms of the one instance in Larnach's life that I, as a researcher, am interested in, Snedden takes a very different approach than either of the other two biographers that I've read. And this is where it historiographically gets somewhat questionable. Not wrong. I'm not sort of asserting that Snedden is wrong or that the narrative that she constructs could not be true. It very well might. I don't know. The problem is that Snedden doesn't know either, but she presents it as though she does know. And if you are familiar with historiographic practice, that is, the ways in which historians deal critically with material evidence, documentary evidence, historical information, you will know that if you are not sure, you should not present something as a fact. So, what is this thing? The one thing that I'm interested in is why Larnach killed himself in 1898. October 12th, 1898. He shoots himself in the head in Committee Room J of the New Zealand Parliament building in Wellington, New Zealand. Why does he do it? No one is sure. He had faced a series of business failures, financial losses, etc., but that had sort of been a long-term state of affairs. He seemed to be in mental and psychological decline, but again, that had been a long-term state of affairs. So it's unclear what on or around October 12th, 1898, compelled Larnach to put a revolver to his temple and pull the trigger. In 1950, Reed offers no real explanation for this. In particular, there's one proposed explanation, which is the historically questionable one. Reed does not mention it at all. Some sources say the book that Knight's book was published in 1981. Some say 1993. So I'm ambivalent about when the book came out, but we'll call it 1993 for the sake of argument. In 1993, Knight mentions that this rumor existed, but seems to discredit it, seems to doubt its veracity. Snedden, by contrast, takes it as fact. And that rumor is that Larnach's third wife, Connie, was having an affair with his son from his first marriage, Douglas. So, one of the things that's so fascinating about this is that Snedden simply introduces this as though it's a fact, as though it's a sort of uncontested, self-evident fact, and yet her presentation of it suggests exactly why it would be contested. So the Larnachs went to Australia in 1897, and it says, while he, William, was occupied as commissioner in investigating the investment prospects of mining companies in Queensland, His wife Connie and son Douglas, far from the prying eyes of the camp, enjoyed one another's company among the banana palms and the pineapple plants, under the tropical downpours and scorching sun, continuing a love affair which was the barely concealed subject of gossip for many years. Douglas was 6 years younger than Connie. Whether William ever realized their friendship had gone beyond the bounds of stepmother and stepson can only be conjecture, but it had become common knowledge among the family, and he was not an unobservant man. She subsequently refers to the lack of love from his wife and unfilial behavior of his son Douglas. And she says, straight after the funeral, Alfred de Bath Brandon, that was Connie's brother, long aware of the situation between Connie and Douglas, quickly organized Connie and her sister Anne to take a trip to England, hoping to avoid any further scandals. And then in the epilogue, almost at the end of the book, she says, in reference to why Larnach killed himself at this point, the blow that tipped the balance must have been the betrayal by Douglas and Connie. So Snedden takes this as fact, right? She accepts directly that there was an affair between these two people. Now, why is that a problem? Well, because there's not really much evidence for it. So in that first passage that I had read you, the one about Australia, there's two references here that I think are significant to this. One was the barely concealed subject of gossip, and the other is had become common knowledge among the family. Here's the problem. Gossip, common knowledge, these things are not necessarily reflective of truth, right? And this is especially difficult to parse because after Larnach died intestate, there was a legal battle between Connie and Donald, Colleen, and was the other Alice? Yeah. So Donald, Colleen, and Alice, three of Larnach's children from his first marriage, launched a legal battle against Connie, arguing basically that their father had tricked them into signing away their inheritance rights without them knowing what they were signing. Douglas sided with Connie in that lawsuit, and only after Connie lost did he then subsequently launch his own suit to try and claim that he also had been tricked and he should inherit with his siblings. This was an incredibly divisive legal battle, and you have, at the very least, Alice and Colleen, who spent years disliking Connie. So you have a turbulent relationship. Stack on top of that a contentious legal battle, and suddenly a contentious legal battle featuring both Connie and Douglas, the two people about whom this rumor on who this rumor focuses. And suddenly the thing that Hardwicke Knight uses to doubt this becomes quite reasonable, because Hardwicke Knight says something to the effect of these were rumors initiated and perpetuated by people who had a grudge against Connie. I mean, if you're trying to diminish someone's reputation, if you're trying to undercut them as a moral figure, which, I mean, this was the Victorian era, personal morality was incredibly important, right, in terms of one's reputation, one's standing, and reputation and standing had a big impact on how the law would see one. So if you wanted to diminish someone's reputation, their standing, the general view of them within the community, not quite, but incesty behavior, betrayal of one's husband and father, that's a pretty good way of doing it. And one of the problems with asserting that this gossip already existed or was common knowledge for years beforehand is there's no concrete evidence presented for that. Gossip is tough as a piece of historical evidence because people decades later who have invested their narrative of these events with the idea that a particular thing was true will often reconstruct in their mind prior events so that they support that narrative, right? So in this instance, I don't doubt that Larnach family members descended from Donald, Alice, and Colleen genuinely told this story, that there was gossip about this for years beforehand, that everybody knew it was happening, etc., etc. Whether that is true is a different question, right? Whether that's sort of ontologically true as opposed to they subsequently came up with this rumor to discredit Connie and, to a lesser extent, Douglas, and then sort of retroactively fitted it into this narrative. The problem is, without any concrete material or documentary evidence, you can't really say this definitely happened. And in the beginning of the epilogue, Snedden almost acknowledges this. She doesn't get there because she accepts as fact that the affair happened. But she does say, the crucial letter, the letter that so upset Larnach the afternoon of his death, was never found. Could it have been a letter from Douglas confirming his father's suspicion that his favored son and his beloved young wife were indeed having an affair? Nor did the letter Larnach so anxiously posted to Dundin that fateful day ever surface. Was it to Douglas? Nothing at all came to light that might have given a clue to his torment. This means that there's a hypothetical letter that, if it existed, would explain everything. If it existed. And that's really the problem. There isn't a letter. As Snedden says, nothing concrete ever came to light. There is no actual evidence to suggest that this affair occurred beyond gossip and rumors by people who have a vested interest in undermining the reputation of Connie and Douglas. There is no documentary evidence, nothing in writing, nothing from before Larnach's suicide that proves definitively that anyone thought there was an affair going on or that anyone was thinking this, saying this, whatever it is. And so the evidence for this affair becomes gossip, rumors. There's no concrete evidence that it occurred or that Larnach knew about it or anything like this. And yet Snedden presents this as this is clearly and obviously the correct historical fact. And that is the historiographic move I find so fascinating.